Star Wars is back after 7 years and a lot of drama. Is it a return to form? Let's find out.
You've seen it before, haven't you?
Once more unto the bridge, dear friends.
Again and again until we're both dead.
There's only like 12 stories. They change around little details, but all pretty much the same.
Deja vu. Something very familiar about it.
Hello, welcome to You've Seen It Before, movie reviews to Connections in Mind. The Mandalorian and Grogu is the first Star Wars movie to hit theaters in 7 years since the release of 2019's The Rise of Skywalker. It is directed by Jon Favreau and once again features the return of Pedro Pascal as Din Djarin, aka the Mandalorian, and his sidekick Grogu as we find themselves in the service of the New Republic as freelance rangers who are hunting down ex-Imperial officers, and when Mando and Grogu take a job that is more complicated than it seems at first glance, some predictable chaos ensues. Now, this review will contain spoilers of The Mandalorian and Grogu, as well as certain other things. I'll be doing my spoiler-free thoughts first and foremost, though, so just so you know, there will be spoilers later on this review, so first things first, though, let's get into some spoiler-free thoughts on The Mandalorian and Grogu. Is this a good Star Wars movie? Is this a good return to form? Is this worth seeing in the theater? I would say if you have young kids who are really into Star Wars and like The Mandalorian show on Disney Plus, they're gonna find some things to enjoy on this one. You know, you got Mando, you got Grogu coming around, you've got great practical effects. I don't remember the name of the species, but whatever Babu Frick is, the little guy, and you know they're hopping around with Grogu. You know, there's fun to be had. There's great creatures. There's lots of Star Warsian action scenes here. You got fighter combat. You've got Mando shooting various bad guys all around. And if you're a great Star Wars fan, there's some things to enjoy in this. There's some interesting references in this. However, I gotta say, this is a bit of a letdown, and it's not just from, Star Wars being out of theaters for so long, and we've gotten so much Star Wars since that has been, let's say call it a mixed bag. You've got the high highs of something like Andor or, early Mandalorian, and you've got low lows like the Acolyte and others, and you got a whole bunch in between where it's just kind of, it exists, it's fine. But it's nothing really, remarkable. And I feel like this movie is gonna end up falling into that it's unremarkable category. And that's kind of a shame because, the Mandalorian is such a cool character. Pedro Pascal does a great job, as always, with this character. Whether, for the most part, he's got the helmet on. You can't see him. But his delivery works really well. And his, even when at one point, he loses his helmet and, when you see his face, he looks great. He's a great job with that. And Grogu, the puppeteer work, the practical effects on this are phenomenal. Always have been. So those aspects are great. So those elements are in this. And I will say the score of this movie is amazing. I love the way, it has kind of a Blade Runner kind of feel to it a lot of times, especially once you get to a certain planet where, the aesthetic is pretty much Blade Runner, with the way they shoot it, the way this planet is depicted. And there are worse things to emulate than Blade Runner. And, that part of it is fine. Where I think the movie gets let down and where it becomes unremarkable is it's just a whole lot of noise. It's, a lot of sound and fury signifying nothing because really there's no character development at all in this movie. I mean, Mando is basically in the same place as he is from beginning to end. Grogu is basically in the same place from beginning to end. You have a couple other characters in this. For instance, we see one of the Hutts, a CGI character of the Hutts, voiced by Jeremy Allen White. And he's in different circumstances from beginning to end, but, arc-wise, I'm not entirely certain he has an arc. Sigourney Weaver plays a New Republic pilot, one of the head of this ranger station, and she doesn't have an arc really. Shows up at the beginning, she shows up at the end, and really, I like Sigourney Weaver, but she just didn't seem like she had much to work with on this. She just kind of seems bored throughout most of it. She barely even cracks a smile throughout most of this, and again, by the end, it's like, how could you not be, it's a bad sign when you're not seem to be excited to be, in a Star Wars production, and that doesn't show up in the performance. Maybe that was the direction. I don't know. But really, there's not, if you're looking for deep story and a character, that's not here. That is nowhere to be found in this. So what are you left with? Well, you got the action scenes. Well, there's some fun action scenes in here. I will say there's probably the best one is, where, is a fight between Mando and a bunch of creatures, which, if you're a Star Wars fan, you'll recognize the reference, and there's some fun little action to be had and some cute references in this, but overall, it's like you go from one big action scene to another big action scene, to another big action scene, to another big action scene, and it's like, what, it just, you get tired at the end of it, and it wears you down to the point where it's like, all right, where are we going with this? And it seems obvious that it was the primary focus of these action scenes. It's like, well, we got these new characters in there. We're going to sell some toys that way. And, Star Wars, to one extent or another, has always been that. But, you've got to bring something else to the table than just that. You've got, banging your action figures together. That's fine. But, once it comes time to put the toys back in the toy chest, it's like, well, what was that 2 hours about, really? And I think what this movie is going to boil down to is, was this worth putting into theaters? And I think in this day and age of streaming, and especially with peak TV, where Disney and others were putting massive amounts of money into these streaming shows, and it showed. I mean, first season, second season Mandalorian, it looked gorgeous, and those are like movie level budgets per season and almost per episode were looking like that. And they looked great, and the writing was pretty good. But here it's like, well, nothing really differentiates that from what we got on Disney Plus. And why did I pay money to see this if it's what I got on Disney Plus, and they don't really add anything, they don't elevate anything to this, and that is sort of a shame. So I can't say this is a bad movie, but I can't call it great either. This falls into that category of, this is going to go in one ear out the other, and if you're rewatching The Mandalorian on Disney Plus, once this movie gets dropped onto Disney Plus as well, this would be a good companion piece for that. I'm not sure exactly where on the timeline this fits in. I think this probably at least goes into after season 3, but, where that is in relation to where it is, before Force Awakens, I don't know. I haven't looked into that, but aside from that, I don't think this is a particularly memorable movie at the end of it, which again is kind of a shame. So if I was going to give The Mandalorian and Grogu a letter grade, I would say this falls in a C range. It's very middle of the road as far as I'm concerned. And if I were to weigh this in on the scale of unoriginality, I would say this weighs in at reworked script. Same puzzle pieces assembled in a different order, because it really does feel like it's just a generic episode of The Mandalorian that stripped out any of the plot developments or character arcs on that. And speaking of plot developments and character arcs, let's get into the spoiler talk of The Mandalorian and Grogu, because I do have some more things to say on that. Let's talk about where you may have seen some of these things before. And really what I want to start with is what I think is the best action scene of the movie is the cage fight, rather. The Jajaric match, I think is what he called it. And, you brought the creatures in, and it took me a second to realize, like, oh, these are the real life creature inspirations behind the game that Chewie, C-3PO, and R2-D2 were playing in A New Hope, that board game, and They even go to so far as the one creature does the same, flip and toss down finishing move as that character in it. And that was all well and good. That was a nice little reference, but I could not help but think that this is very much like Thor Ragnarok, especially because the way Rada the Hutt is shown is, basically, it's like, no, I don't want to leave. They like me. They're cheering me on. It's like, how can you not see, Hulk? It's like, no, Hulk stay. I want to, they like me here. And it's like, how do you not see the parallel on that one? And it doesn't hurt the movie by anything, but it just seems very, very familiar. And speaking of very, very familiar, the way they shoot these action scenes in particular, especially with Mando basically doing his action hero shtick, where he shoot him in the dark, he shoots from the dark, you see stormtroopers getting yanked back by his cable or whatever. It's like they're basically shooting him like he's Batman, or kind of like John Wick at a certain extent when he goes full, firing left and right or whatever when he goes to the droids. And again, it's not bad, but when you see, these sorts of tropes, we've seen them so many times, you can't help but connect these sort of things to those other things. And it doesn't seem clever. It doesn't seem, additive or anything. It's just emulating what's come before. And that's, like I said, it's not bad that you emulate certain things, but you got to do something unique with this. And I'm not sure that really qualifies with these. So ultimately, what I kind of wanted to end on is, this criticism, and this is something that I was thinking leaving the theater, and I mentioned it before, where it's like, this feels like an episode of The Mandalorian that you would watch on Disney Plus, except it's on the big screen, but they don't really add anything to it. The counterpoint that I think, and there's two other movies that I could point to, both with Star in the name, that can be compared to this movie from that phenomenon standpoint. One, I think, is Star Trek Generations, where I think, that's not a perfect movie. It's got some flaws, but one of the criticisms that people levied on it at the time was that, well, it's just, this feels like just an episode of the show on the big screen. So why are we, so that doesn't make it good. It's like, well, Star Trek Generation was very good, especially, so having it just be another episode of the show is not a bad thing, but they knew when they got on the big screen, they did add some stuff. They made big spectacle out of it. They gussied up the bridge sets so it looked more cinematic. You have the destruction of the Enterprise, and that's a huge action set piece, and it looks great. I wish they didn't, copy the same bird of prey explosion from Undiscovered Country, but that, beside that, they upped the ante on that front. And I think, so as far as comparison goes, that is a good way of being a continuation of the show, or being accused of just another episode of the show, but adding something more and better to it, which I don't think Mandalorian and Grogu did. And the other comparison that I can make with this is the movie Stargate Continuum, which was a continuation of Stargate SG-1, same characters, but they added something. They put them in new situations. They upped the stakes on that, and that it was a direct to DVD movie, but it was it felt like a natural continuation of the show in a way that, yes, there's a good reason why we couldn't do this on the show. We make it an event sort of thing. This Mandalorian and Grogu doesn't necessarily feel like an event to me. It feels like I said, another episode of the show, which is not terrible, but it does beg the question of like, well, why did you make this a movie? Why did you put this on the big screen? Ultimately, I'm one of those weirdos who's like, no, Star Wars, it should be an event. Like, I miss when we had 3 years in between movies. I saw Phantom Menace in '99. I was 5 years old, or almost 6, and it's like I have to wait 3 years for the next Star Wars movie. I'm going to be bursting at that point. And yes, we've waited 7 years in between cinematic outings, but we had so much other Star Wars at that. And I'm just Star Wars just needs to go away for a while, as far as I'm concerned. It's like, just let it fade for a little bit and rebuild back. That's why Force Awakens did so well, because it had, we had Clone Wars or whatever, but it had gone away for a decade at that point before it came back, and everyone was excited about it, and it was an event, and it was good. So, I don't know. I could keep going on forever. Those are my main thoughts on The Mandalorian and Grogu. What did you think of it? Did you like it? Did you not like it? What about my analysis? Do you agree? Disagree? Did I miss something? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate whatever audience I can get. If you liked this video or any other video on my channel, please give me a like, share, and especially subscribe. I would very much appreciate it. Be sure to look for my next movie review, which will be for Masters of the Universe, which comes out June 5th, I believe. So be sure to look for that. And once again, thank you so much for watching. Just remember, there is nothing new under the sun. And yes, you have seen it before.